a real treat. I'm Catherine Hales from the Department of English, and I hope as of July 1 also the Department of Design and Media Arts. And I would like to introduce this evening Marjorie Luesebrink, our first presenter. And Margie is a dear personal friend of mine, so it's a double pleasure to be able to talk a little bit about her work in this context. Margie is one of the pioneers inventing the field of electronic literature. She sits on the board of directors of the Electronic Literature Association, and she has published, or is about to publish, one of the first truly multimedia hypertext novels called Califia, about which I hope she'll speak a little bit tonight. And I had started reading hypertext literature, perhaps a decade ago, and it immediately struck me that the first literary hypertexts were essentially based on a print model, that they did not make much visual use of the interface, and they read very much like dispersed print literature. And Margie's was the first work I saw that made me know there was a new generation of writers and works underway. Her novel Califia is certainly the first multimedia novel that I read, and it just took my breath away. So she has really helped to initiate this second wave of literary hypertexts that make much fuller use of image, sound, and have created a truly visual interface. Califia has been reviewed both in English and in Spanish, and Margie herself has a distinguished record as a writer, including being featured at the Squaw Valley Writers Conference, at the Transcription Series at UC Santa Barbara, the Cultural Studies Symposium at Kansas State, and the Popular Literature Conference. We passed out a bibliography of her web-based work, and that's available, as well as sheets on Califia and a website she curated called Progressive Dinner Party. So please join me in welcoming Marjorie Luesebrink tonight. Thank you.
Am I supposed to use this too? No. Okay.
The Humanities Computing is considering launching an initiative on electronic literature, and to do so it would help them to know we have support and interest on the campus in this area. So there will be a sign-up sheet going around, and we would very much appreciate it if you would just put your name down so we have some record of who's here this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Kate, very much. For an electronic person, I'm almost over electronic right now, so I think I'll just go with my little laser. Thank you very much for that generous introduction. Kate, of course, was my first initiation into electronic literature. She directed a summer seminar for the National Institute of Humanities, and this was called Literature in Transition, and I signed up for it not knowing quite what I was getting into, and found that it was the most exciting new thing that I'd ever seen in my life, and that it certainly opened all of our eyes, I think, to the possibilities for literature in the electronic medium. It's a pleasure to be here also, and I thank Victoria Vesna and Bill Siemens for setting this up and for making this space available. This is a wonderful space. A little mood music here. So, I'm going to talk over it. When I first decided on a title for this presentation, you will notice that in the website it says Open Sesame, and Open Sesame seemed like an apt approach. In the traditional version of the Open Sesame story, the rock magically rolled aside to reveal the contents inside the cave. What I intended to ask was, what if we were inside the cave and the rock were rolling aside to give us a view outside the cave, a chance to look at what the open countryside beyond the confines of the cave might look like. After all, I was talking about hypertext literature, the making of electronic narratives, an act that moves us from the dark, linear confines of print to an entirely new world of sensory experience and spatial possibility. The expanded world of electronic representation is evident, I believe, in many of the pieces that I'm going to talk about tonight. Open Sesame is still useful for us, but in the last 2 months, even, the field of electronic web literature has begun to change so quickly that when I actually sat down to make this little flash thing, I thought, this is not just Open Sesame. This is the year of living dangerously in the wild, wild web. And so I'll tell you the story, and it begins with the complexity of the new work that we're seeing on the web. Hypermedia work does not merely offer us one new perspective, but many, and multi is the operative word. What's been happening over the last year is that the work that we've been seeing in literature on the web has been morphing and blending in a mysterious fashion. Genres are disappearing, categories are dead on arrival, and suspect groups of revolutionaries are springing up, communicating in a strange language of code and sign. You are free to imagine short story writers and artists, and programmers and poets and musicians and novelists, dressed in camouflage, hiding behind every palm tree as we proceed. And since we are in the midst of a revolution, it would seem, I hope to address you tonight not as a theorist so much as a writer in a secure medium, but more in the nature of a reporter from behind the lines and not even very sure where the lines are right now. So here begins an account of the year of living dangerously, beginning with the story of the Progressive Dinner Party. The roots of this revolution, go back to 1995, when we put on our bandwidth armbands and the internet became the World Wide Web. Artists immediately, this is of course a new media setup, and many of the people here are artists, and the artists migrated to the web almost instantly. One of the first things you saw on the World Wide Web were art galleries representing both traditional art and new kinds of gallery things. And film and new media artists also migrated to the web very quickly. And people like Victoria Vesna, Tony Dove, Natalie Bookchin, Zoe Beloff, Kathy Ray Huffman, and others. And poets gravitated to the web very quickly. In iambic pentameter, one might say, with zines such as Las Pequeño Glazier's Electronic Poetry Center, Mike Neff's Web de Soul, and several more excellent online poetry publications. But literature per se was not in on this early revolution. Although critical vehicles such as Joe Tabby's Postmodern Culture and Postmodern Culture and Joe Tabby's Electronic Book Review did do critical reviews, there were the usual reservations to reading stories in electronic media. Readers were attached to leather-bound volumes, and you couldn't read electronic novels in the bathtub. But you'll notice here that nobody expected, in the first place, to look at art in the bathtub. Apparently they didn't expect to read poetry in the bathtub, and it's clear that they didn't expect to look at movies in the bathtub, although Tony tells me she's going to have her laptop with a downloadable video, and I suppose we could have that on a ledge above the bathtub. But no one was worried about the venue of looking at these other art areas, but they were extremely concerned about literature, because literature needed to be surrounded by a whole set of behaviors that we attach to linear print. The web did encourage collaborative stories, however, such as hypertext hotel and online collaborations. But these were role-playing games for the most part, and were not considered literature either by many. And so the question of whether or not literature could exist in electronic form is still up for grabs. But things are changing very fast, and they changed very fast this year. In the fall of 1999, Brian Lennon brought the Iowa Review Web online. Writing the Meridian came online. Piff magazine and other zines on the web started accepting literature, short stories, multimedia fiction. And about this time, Writing the Meridian Jennifer Leigh decided to do an online issue in Women in Technology, and I decided that it would be an easy job at the beginning to do a survey of the women on the web. The theme of this piece was inspired by an event last June here at UCLA. Catherine Hales received a Distinguished Teaching Award, and also honored that evening was Judy Chicago for Lifetime Achievement. When Jennifer decided to dedicate her spring issue to women in technology, I thought, oh, well, this is a lot like the issues that Judy Chicago had addressed in her dinner party, where we had a number of people working without institutional support, often without recognition, and from a variety of different disciplines. And so I decided to call this the Progressive Dinner Party. And we found, like all revolutions, that the terminology from the Ancien regime simply would not hold at all. This is the opening screen for the Progressive Dinner Party, which you have a handout for, and it's online. And my 2 points about this, I think, are both self-evident and yet at the same time elusive. The first point about it is that we are in the midst, as far as literature is concerned, of a revolution which leaves us almost no way to describe the new work that we are seeing, because it is melting and blending together so much that we are not really able to tell whether we're looking at visual art, whether we're looking at game, whether we're looking at drama, whether we're looking at commentary, whether we're looking at poetry, whether we're looking at narrative, or some other combination thereof. And the second part, the part that I think is so interesting, is that we tend to, at the end of 2 generations of media-savvy individuals working in many different fields, we tend to take it for granted that we have a thing called multimedia. But if we look at it from a literature point of view, we begin to see how really strange this is. No one was going to ever hang Great Expectations in a gallery. No one would have said, oh, here we've got Dickens and we're going to just hang this in a gallery. But right now, we see that some of the standard web writers, such as Mark America, where is his venue? His venue is the Whitney. His venue is Walker Art Center. We're looking at clearly issues in which many, many practitioners in this field are showing their works or publishing in a cross-genre way. That is, they're having them exhibited on art sites. This web work is being exhibited or published in poetry sites. It's also being exhibited or published as narrative fiction in traditional fiction sites on the web. So this became evident in the Progressive Dinner Party. I'm doing another piece for the fall issue that pairs the 39 women with 40 men. It's going to be called Jumpin' at the Diner, and already I can see that the year living dangerously is going to continue. Judy Chicago actually had names of the things that she wanted to use to describe the work that the women she was honoring did, and we ended up having almost none. Progressive Dinner Party? This is one of the opening screens. Catherine Hales was the person I turned to help us decode and decipher. This is a little dinner background music. And also Talon Nemok, what we were doing here on the web with this new work. And let me just read a quote from her commentary, which christened this work open work, which is a very interesting way of looking at the lack of boundaries, the merging of interface and intraface. She said, "Another aspect of the openness of open work is expressed in its fusion of text and image. With digital technology, the flat, durable mark of print is transformed into a kinetic screen image. Even when screen text is represented as a stable inscription, it is always image, just as image, underwritten by textual code at many levels, is also always text. The mark that functions simultaneously as word and image is enacted as text and image, transformed visually into one another. Not since illuminated manuscripts has visual thinking and verbal literacy come to such close conjunction, challenging a generation of practitioners to think in both modes at once." This is the virtual table in the dinner party that you'll be able to go see. Oh, no, don't click here, Jason. These, the triangle is a somewhat carryover reverse of Judy Chicago's triangle table. Each of the stars represents one of the 39 women. And of course, if you scroll down here, you get the names. And I was wanting to go to Carolyn Geyer, because that's what we're going to start in a minute. And then when you click on one of the names, you come to a placemat and then a piece that you can go see, and that opens up in a separate window. Now, I'm thinking that when I loaded this, that I couldn't get back. So if you could go to the Go Back button. Do we have a Go button on there? No, I want to go all the way back to the, do we have a Go button that takes me, History button? Okay, good. Proceed to dinner 2. That's good, thank you. At first, I wasn't quite sure that I was going to be able to come up with 39 women, but of course, that lasted for about a day and a half. Carolyn Gerton was also doing a piece called Assemblage, which is a resource of women working on the web and in electronic arts. And we paired up, and within no time at all, we were in the process of trying to limit this web work. And we started to limit it by, unfortunately, limiting it to English speaking, English written works, and then to something which we characterized loosely as hypertext, meaning that there were links to it, and then to something which we were trying to define as web specific. And I've given Bill Siemens, who seems to have a good ear for wonderful phrases, the job by Friday to figure out what we're going to call it other than web work. Open work is very good. We are still without apt terminology. One of the things about the blending is that many of the women here function in many different ways, so that there's a blending both of function as individuals and also a blend of media. Most of the artists of the 39 that we included here function in real life as writers, artists, editors, critics, hypertext promoters, designers, and they come from a variety of backgrounds: art, poetry, programming, music, video, and fiction. First of all the works have usually some aspect of collaboration, although for our work, for our look here, I picked Mother Millennia by Carolyn Geyer. This is a work which is a collection of 2,000 stories by men and women all over the world about their mothers. And as you can see, it has narratives, fiction, oral histories, poetry, essays, video, and sound. And it begins to show us the way that the word story, as in fiction, is beginning to dissolve. The second one I picked is to look at our idea that design is a part of this melting together process. Olia Lealina is a Russian designer. She has her own design firm in Russia. And this little piece called Agatha Appears has a little woman who comes down from the side and she sings, and she and the man go off into cyberspace intimacy together. It's a wonder of design, since Olea works with a very limited toolbox, and with very, very spare coding, and in a very limited frame, she manages to do some really unusual design things. But it's also a story, and it's also collaboration, and so we'll move on here. I chose Natalie Bookchin as an artist who's also merging together in this incredible, pancake around the palm tree. This game, this piece, The Intruder, by Natalie Bookchin, who is in the art department here in California at Cal Arts, is a game. It's a game based on a short story by Borges. It's also a narrative of the short story, and of course, since she's an artist, it's a wonder of design, and it's technically very sophisticated. Commentary is also a part of this blending together that we see. This piece is by Jacqueline Lopez Garcia, and I just wanted to read to you in the acknowledgments how many different fields she mentions to thank at the end of this. She thanks the UC Riverside Art Department, the California Museum of Photography, the Sweeney Art Gallery, the College of Humanities, Arts, and Social Sciences, the UCR Center for Virtual Research, the UCR Academic Computing, the UCR Chicano Student Programs, UCR Chicano Educational Cultural Fund, and the Associated Students of UCR. This is a wonderful piece that is a story, it is a personal history, it's a very interesting design, and of course has commentary about social issues in Southern California and perhaps across the United States. Here's a very static screen. I don't know why I picked this for cutting edge technology, but now I'm glad I did, because the cutting edge technology that was yesterday looks pale next to what we see on the web the next day. So this is a very interesting piece, which is criticism, it's a story, it's a little bit of a fill-in game. Leanne Ramsey hails from Australia, and she uses in this piece, which is called Zones of Recognition, some very unusual approaches to technology. So another thing that we see in this World Wide Web blending is that as we get people from other countries who are differently acculturated, their ads are slightly different, their worldview is slightly different, their landscape view is slightly different, they also tend to use technology in interesting and exciting ways, and of course that energizes the whole field. I picked Stephanie Strickland's Ballad of Sand and Hairy Soot. Stephanie represents, again, the same kind of thing that we're beginning to see in all of this web work. She began as a prize-winning print poet. She was in Catherine Hales's famous 1995 workshop. She migrated to hypertext work at Catherine Hales's workshop. Now, in the Ballad of Sand and Hairy Soot, she has actually collaborated with several very fine artists, including Jean-Pierre Hébert and Bruce Shapiro, who the sand paintings you might recognize. It's a poem, because Stephanie is primarily a poet. It's visually lovely, and of course, as a ballad should be, it's a story with a fully shaped narrative storyline. I picked Dina Larson to show you the way in which traditional print looking or print carryover has begun to change. Dina was one of the pioneer writers in Story Space, which was the early, print vehicle translated into Links and Lexia, and now she's moved on to the web and doing pieces like Disappearing Rain. This is a long piece. It has 144 screens, but they're all accessed by a symbolic use of the Japanese kanjis. And so we have that merging of image and into a metaphor for the way that you access even quite a long narrative story. And criticism, because all of these pieces in one way or another are responding to a whole body of critical work that has arisen probably since about 1990 about hypertext. So that many times at least from the writers, you'll see that issues which Kate Hale has brought up, George Landau might have brought up, Jay Bolter brings up, these are in the writing interpolated in different kinds of ways. But Zoe Beloff's Illusions, the philosophical toy world, is actually a little plaything, which is of course like a narrative story, but it's also a critical history of film. And she says, this is a keyhole cinema, a cinema that must continually reinvent itself. And of course it's technologically quite sophisticated. And finally, we have the private journal, which is another thing that we see blending in together with all of these other different concerns on the web. I picked Kathy Marshall's Silicon Valley Journal. Kathy is also an early hypertext, story space, Eastgate pioneer. And it's interesting because as we go forward to the next little section, I'm going to be talking about why it is that narrative has moved with such difficulty onto the web, and joined and merged now finally this year with all of these other exciting forms. But one of the difficulties of writing on the web is the difficulty of establishing a narrative voice, because the machine itself does not have the same kind of default assumptions that we have in print. Nobody complains if a print book starts off, let's say we're Faulkner, and the print book starts off saying, so Joby was running down the path. Nobody says to themselves, because we have a print tradition, so who's telling this story and how come it's on this page? But as soon as we have a web situation, we have in fiction narrative a problem of establishing the authenticity of a fictive voice. That's one of the reasons why you'll notice that private journal comes off much more easily, because one is very willing to believe that Kathy Marshall is going to tell us about what's happening in Silicon Valley. All of these pieces I would have loved to have shown you, but I do not live dangerously enough to go onto the web in a place that I've never worked the computer before. So that's really living dangerously. So I would recommend to you that you do visit the dinner party, and that you watch for the men jumping at the diner in the fall. The range of work is very interesting, and of course the idea that coming from print literature, that a fusion is happening that is difficult to describe and will continue to challenge those of us coming from print literature for quite a long time, I think is very exciting, and I hope that you enjoy those pieces. The issue of establishing a fictive voice in electronic literature was, of course, the problem that I first approached when I went to do Califia. So in the way that someone who goes into something new and is enchanted with the media often does, I bit off far more than I could chew. So if it was a problem to establish one voice, then the idea would be, let's have 3 voices. So in this particular piece in Califia, I have 3 narrators, and Bill and I were talking a little bit earlier about some of Victoria's ideas of database, and in a sense what the 3 narrators are designed to do is they are designed to access a historical database in 3 different ways. One character, Augusta, is a real-time character. She lives in the present. She's a real estate agent in Southern California, right? She wears a diamond tennis bracelet. She only notices what's going on outside the car window. Calvin, her next door neighbor, is a set designer, knee furniture buyer in the movie business, and he sees things at that middle distance. So he is a character of rhythmic resonance. He sees strategically, is in the way of a director or a set designer or something like that would see a limited sphere, but certainly much further than Augusta sees, and for different purposes as well. Augusta really is interested in digging up this gold that she thinks is in her backyard, that she hopes is going to pay for the bills for the next few months. And then the third character, Kay, is a woo-woo California Earth Mother, and she is cosmically oriented. She sees things on the scale of years and decades and eons, and she most of all wants to see that the cosmic harmony is going to play out. So she'll almost live her life so that the cosmic harmony is not thwarted in the way that she sees it. But in order to allow these characters to be able to reveal the database, I had to do a lot of structuring. And so I'd like to just talk a little bit about the structuring and mapping of this. Califia is way too long for me to say anything more about in terms of plot than this. 3 characters living in California, in Hollywood, actually, in Whitley Heights, meet up together, and they begin to search for a lost stash of gold in California that seems to have eluded 5 generations of all their families. So of course you've got the 5 families, you've got the 5 generations, you've got the 8 spots where the gold might be, and you can already see that you've got a database kind of structure here already. And the 3 characters, since they have different worldviews, time views, and mental psychological views, interact with the material differently. So I'd like to talk just first about navigation as metaphor. The first metaphor is that we are discovering an island. So of course, for the easiest thing for the reader is to follow footprints, and so we invite the reader simply to come ashore. Augusta, who is our real estate agent, lives in the day. She organizes things, of course, by simple manila files, and so her material is accessed by the manila file system. Kay is the cosmic Earth Mother, woo-woo, and she sees everything in terms not only of the Dipper, but of the seasons of the Dipper. Calvin, the strategic person, is actually provider of the maps, and he also provides us with a way of getting around. On every page you can drop down this thing that says paths, history, so forth. This is Calvin's kit bag, and it's like a person who is a good traveler or a good person to travel with, who always brings a kit bag of the necessities, so that you always have, you know, the address and the phone numbers you need and so forth. This is our strategic Calvin. And you notice that we access, Augusta's pages are all accessed linearly in chronological order. Calvin's pages are random access, docudramas. Of course, he stages things and so forth. He also gives us the family tree, since he is a person of organization and schematics. And he gives us, of course, the treasure. All of these versions of the treasure maps come in Calvin's organizational material. And Kay, of course, finds her information in the most unexpected places, and this is the final discovery of the blue blanket. And what I'd like to do in just a final couple minutes here is I'd like to show you what the actual Califia looks like. And what we need to do is pull up, if you pull up there, Califia Roadhead, I want to show you how this structure takes place in real life. So if you come ashore, you go immediately to Augusta's house. And the day after my father was buried, I began digging on the hill behind the house in Whitley Heights. The air was hot and the wind was rising. And if you'll pull down Solar Table now up there, I want you to go to the west. So this is one of the journeys that you can take. You can go north, south, east, or west. And if you visit the landmarks in the west, for example, you can see the Golden Days, Last Dance. So all of these images are ways of mapping on top of the places because they all represent the places where the important events happen. And if you go to Follow Me, you can find out following the footsteps about the story. And now would you pull down Navigator and go to Paths? At the beginning of each of the journeys, you get to choose between the three narrators. They're reinforced by all of the imagery, which reinforces the structural metaphor. If you go to Calvin's Path, go to Calvin's homepage, go to docudramas, go to Jackrabbit Jack Summerland. And this is a picture I'd actually like to leave you with this evening. This picture right here is the corner of, you won't believe this. This is the corner of Westwood Boulevard and LeConte Avenue in 1912. And it's been a pleasure, and I know that it's fast to go through these things, but I hope you got a little taste of what's going on in hypertext literature today. Thank you so much.
Marjorie, we usually have questions and answers, and I'm sure there's many people who are trying to hear.
Questions? Yes.
Do you distinguish between multimedia literature and hypertext literature?
Well, you know, that's just starting to get clear as there's a little historical perspective. I think what's going to happen is that hypertext literature is going to refer to the text-based literature of, let's say, the first wave of electronic literature, and that hypermedia literature will refer to probably what this would be, which is second wave, using all the medium, sound, graphics, and I think of structure as an important media use. Yes? Oh, good, thank you.
Do you do your own design, the visual design, or somebody else is doing it for you?
Well, because this was a new experiment, and I had no idea at the beginning what I was going to come out with, I was forced to do it all myself. In order to collaborate, you almost have to understand something about what the next step is. But this was very much.
And you used mainly Flash for this?
I didn't use any Flash for this. I use Flash on the web now because it reduces so nicely.
So what do you use? What did you use for that?
I use Toolbook. Yeah, it's a kind of antiquated, I guess, now. But. Other questions? Yeah, Wayne?
Do you see this as a sign that literature is becoming a collaborative enterprise because of the many skills involved?
This is a very hard question to answer. I think it depends on the person, and I think there will be a lot of collaboration. But I don't think that we ought to make an assumption at this early time that it's a necessity. And I will say this because it's part of the vision is the way that the other things happen. In other words, what you do with the sound and the images has an awful lot to do with an interior vision that is very difficult to share and is very time consuming to share. So that if you happen to live next door to the person, that's really good. Stephanie Strickland and I have collaborated on a couple of things. One of one of the pieces you can see at my website. But in order to do that, we emailed for 9 months. And then she flies to my house from New York, and we sit down at the computer and we work together for 2 or 3 weeks. And at the end of that time, since she is a slave driver, I am nearly dead. So, yeah, it's very, I think collaborating is very hard.
Given that this is obviously such an intricate work, I just was really curious as to how long it took you to put everything together. And
the first version was actually completed in about 3.5 years. But I need to say that that was only possible because I had most of the material. I'm also a 5th generation Californian, and my relatives didn't leave me any money, but they left me a lot of pictures. So that was my heritage. If I'd had to go out and buy those pictures or find those documents, I had everything from, as you'll see in Califia, everything from old documents on the first land offering of Palos Verdes, things like that, useless otherwise, but very useful for a piece like this. So if I had to collect all those things, I think it would have taken me another 2 or 3 years.
were you literate in technology before you started this, or did you
Yeah,
Okay,
I started in about 1980, and I wanted very much to learn to do this kind of thing, but I almost had to wait for the technology to arrive.
Oh wow!
Yeah.
'Cause I know how hard it is to make a web page, and this is just so extensive and complicated. It's very impressive.
It is complicated, but it's a very freeing thing for a print writer to come to a place where you can use any kind of sensory images and objects in making a world.
Thank you.
Is there another hand there? Or?
Everything is on the web.
Oh, just a second.
This is not, Califia is not on the web. Califia is 400 megabytes. It's on a CD-ROM. It's being finished just as we speak by Eastgate Systems. It'll be out in another week, I hope. Of course, this is not like print where you get a book back and if there's a typo, well, there's a typo and you probably don't have it done again. If there's a mistake on a CD-ROM that we've been working on the editing for 9 months, it'll probably mean that it won't work and we have to run the whole thing over again and re-edit it, you know. So I'm hoping that it'll be out next week. But it'll be available from Eastgate Systems. If you go to my website, I'm giving away beta copies. All you have to do is send me your address. Send you a copy.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you. And, well, I'd like to first welcome so many people coming here from English, which is new. I'm the chair of the Department of Design, Media Arts, and one of the purposes of this space is actually to mix disciplines and promote hybrids, such as Marjorie's work. And everything we do is streamed live, so we actually have an audience watching us right now, and everything is archived too. So if you're interested in seeing our past speakers, or even reviewing what was talked about tonight, just log on to our website and